technology, but I know nothing about tech. So I'm going to toss it over to my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. We'll dive into a couple questions and hopefully we'll be joined by Kai in a few minutes. So I'll toss it over to Rose first.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rose Barr. I grew up not too far from Binghamton, and most people who are in Binghamton know where Watertown is, unlike being in the city. And Lauren believes that north of the Tappan Zee Bridge is upstate New York. I went to Binghamton from 2002 to 2006, where I played softball. I stayed at Binghamton for an additional 2 years after graduating with my undergrad, and worked in the athletics department where I met my mentor. Took my first gig in sports with the New York Islanders, and soon after landed with the Yankees in 2010 when we were building right after we won a championship. So I don't have a ring like Jennifer, but took the opportunity with the Yankees when we were building a sales team for the first time. And now I oversee all of sales service and business strategy for the New York Yankees. Kate, I'll kick it over to you. Oh, looks like we have Kai here.
Hi, sorry everyone for the technical difficulties. I see you guys were in the middle of introducing yourselves. I don't know who else hasn't gone, if you guys still want to introduce yourselves.
I think Rose may have kicked it over to me, so I'll take it, Kai, no worries. We'll get Lauren, some of Lauren's IT people from Google to help you out next time. I am Kate Tonley. I graduated Binghamton in 2004. I was a part of the women's basketball program there. I should probably say I was a student athlete. My parents would appreciate that. I was a student athlete, student first. I am from St. Paul, Minnesota, and actually still now live back in Minnesota. After college, I moved back to Minnesota and got the job with the Minnesota Twins. In 2005, I was an intern and then got hired on after that season. So I was for about 15 years, 16 seasons. And I'm now the director of baseball administration on the baseball ops side of our industry. So I handle player contracts, player transactions, budgeting, invoicing, and herding cats. So that is kind of what I do now, and I will kick it over to Jennifer.
Great, thanks, Kate. So I am the senior citizen of this crew. I am a Binghamton Alumni School of Management. I graduated in 1990, so it's been a while. And I was a student, non-athlete, very unathletic. But yeah, I am just most recently been the Chief Financial Officer for the Golden State Warriors. Joined the team in 2013 when they were nothing more than a regional team and not the global brand that they are today, but very proud of the period of time that I was there. Timing is everything, Rose, and yeah, that's right. I did walk away with at least some jewelry for my efforts. So something to aspire to. And I'm looking forward to this conversation, Kai.
As am I. Thank you all so much for being here. Appreciate it so much. And if audience members do not know, if you utilize your chat function on your screen, you can ask any of our panelists any questions, and live Q&A, we will be able to get to those. So make sure you submit your questions. My is for Jennifer and for Kate. I mean,
backup person. So, okay, here's the first question for Jennifer, right? Jennifer, kick us off. Okay. What do you remember about your time at Binghamton University that helped prepare you for such a successful career? So Jennifer, you start, and then we'll toss it over to Kate.
Okay, great. Well, what I do remember was not being a very good accounting student. So I was an accounting major, and I was really struggling with accounting, just theoretically not understanding how it worked. And so my grades were terrible. But what I loved about Binghamton was that it offered like so many other classes that I really was interested in. And so I took a ton of liberal arts classes. At the time, I was so enamored with Japanese culture. So I took Japanese cinema. And so I became almost like an East Asian studies minor. And so I remember that time because it really fostered sort of this love of learning and just really ignited sort of this intellectual curiosity. And I think I've taken that everywhere I've gone. And you know, truth be told, because my accounting grades were so bad, I was actually surprised that I ended up getting recruited by Ernst & Young. But it turns out that they had a Japanese business group. And it was actually all that effort that I had put into my East Asian studies that got me my first accounting job. And so, you know, I always tell everybody, you know, it's okay to follow your passions, and you never know where it might end up. And for me, it ended up getting me my first accounting gig, which was a surprise to everybody. It was in my first recruiting class.
I feel like Lauren's about to throw it over to me.
Over to you. Yes. You know what I was just thinking about too? This is very symbolic. Our coach, our former coach, Rose, and our coach, Brown, is somewhere in the virtual audience. I sat on the bench for the first 2 years of playing softball, but I always had to be ready to jump in. So Coach, thank you for teaching me how to play backup. Kate, over to you now for your answer. Thank you.
I too was familiar with playing backup because I came in under Bess Greenberg, who probably isn't in the audience, but I had to play backup to her freshman year. Anywho, sorry, that is a side comment. I think this is a really good question. I think probably the two things that stand out the most for me in terms of how Binghamton kind of prepared me for my career would be the first and foremost, like I being a student athlete, it was somewhat difficult in the sense of trying to kind of organize and keep your life together. I think anyone who understands being in sports and also having to be a student, like there's a great deal of organizing. Now, don't get me wrong, there were a lot of people telling me where to go and when to go, so it was very easy in terms of I needed to go here, I needed to go there. But I think just in general, being able to organize and keep yourself kind of on task was a huge benefit for me throughout my college career, and then obviously translating into my professional career. And then on the other side of it, I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, and so I'm from the Midwest, and coming out to the East Coast, and I know, Lauren, you'll give me crap because it is upstate New York. I always just said New York. I mean, we're only like an hour and a half outside the city, so going to the big city of New York, you know, it was very different for me, kind of. I hadn't been on that part of the country, and being able to kind of be immersed into different cultures and getting to meet different types of people. I grew up around, a bunch of Midwest folks. And so it was really, I thought, really great to be able to kind of be introduced to another part of our country and be able to be introduced to different types of people and different cultures and all that. And so in my career, I deal with that a lot with our players, with our staff. I think anybody, doesn't that need to be Major League Baseball, but anywhere company you work with, hopefully you're working with a diverse group of people. And I think being able to kind of dip my toes into it in college helped lend itself well to my career, and being able to kind of, associate myself and familiarize myself with different cultures and be, have the curiosity and ask questions. And so that's my answer. I'll kick it back to Lauren. I don't know if I think Kai might be back in the room, but I'm not sure.
Kai, I hope we're doing you proud, Kai, if you're here. So Kate, I agree with you. Great answers. Thank you. I appreciate it. I think, honestly, I remember starting as a student athlete, and you referenced being the student first, and Coach Brown will laugh at this, but I may or may not have 3 times during the first 2 weeks of me being a walk-on to the softball team, because I wanted to make sure that the student was before the athlete, and I wasn't sure if I could handle both. And so what I will say for folks in the room is that being able to manage both very much prepped me for the career that I ultimately ended up having. It taught me time management skills. It taught me how to be a team player. It taught me all of the valuable skills that I've taken with me and continue to use and implement every single day. So it has been instrumental to me. The second question, Rose, this is for you and me. Often sports fans don't get a full behind-the-scenes view of professional sports. With both of us having impressive roles in Major League Baseball, Rose at the Yankees, myself formerly with Major League Baseball specifically, what aspect of the sport would you say was most surprising that the average fan might not realize? Rose,
I love this question. Great question, Lauren, and I'm going to kick it back to you. So So I would say I could give you the boring details of everything that goes into putting on a baseball game with 50,000 people, but I won't bore you with those details. I think the thing for me that is most eye-opening and has been most eye-opening is that the players are humans. For me, growing up in a small town, they were something that was to be aspired to, something that was untouchable. And I think when I think about this conversation and the journey that I went to get here, it's been about Binghamton college athletics was unattainable. And then I was recruited and given an opportunity. And then getting into professional sports was unattainable and had an opportunity. And then when I got to the Yankees, I realized this isn't the end. I'm X years old. We'll leave that off the table for now. And I have a whole lot more to do and prove, not for the brand that I work for, but for myself. And I think my message to everyone here is that whatever you have inside you, whatever you think is unreachable, whatever your big dream is, there's a way of reaching it. And I think the key to that success is just keep finding it and keep searching for it. So my message about professional sports would simply be, these players are human. They make mistakes just like we do. And they go through the same, or maybe not the same, but adversity just like every one of us, and they have to overcome it in a public eye every day. Lauren, what are your thoughts?
It's a really good point. And when players were struggling with certain things, it was my job to step in as a comms person to help clean it up sometimes, right? Or to help behind the scenes make sure that they were comfortable in everything else that was required of them off of the field. They were a player first, to Rose's point, but we at the league office wanted them to be so many other things. We wanted them to be the talent that went on Jimmy Fallon's show. We wanted them to do the fashion photo shoots with GQ magazine. We wanted them to be the face and the entertainment side of Major League Baseball. But they were players first, and they were people behind that facade. And so that was definitely one of my biggest learnings too, Rose. I'd say the other learning took place perhaps my third month in or so. I was up in Boston going to a Red Sox game, tattered Red Sox t-shirt, just sat down to have a hot dog and beer, as one does when they go to a baseball game. And the head of comms texted me. She asked for me to come up to her office to meet her. And that's when I realized that I was no longer a fan and that this was a job. And everything for my 6 years at Major League Baseball was work. Anytime I watched a ball game, my wheel was spinning. Everything came about the business of baseball. And what I realized, too, was that not only was Major League Baseball a massive multi-billion-dollar business, but the league office operated as an extension of an entertainment division. And so when I was there, I started the entertainment team for Major League Baseball. I realized we were only talking to your standard baseball fan. And so what I created was the opportunity to reach a fringe audience through non-baseball ways, frankly. And so it goes back to Rose's point where sometimes these ball players were into the concerts I was producing or the photo shoots we were doing, and sometimes they just simply weren't, and that was okay. And so that was the other big learning, was to remember that they're players and humans first, and all of this other stuff might not be them. And we had to figure out how to keep baseball relevant and sell the sport in ways that were authentic to our biggest product, which are the players. So the third question, okay, let me just find my place here. So this is back to Kate and Jennifer. Kai, hi.
Surprise! That was all. Wanted to see how far Lauren could go with the hosting duties. You did a great job.
So maybe I'll ask you a couple of questions if that's okay.
Honestly, go ahead.
Sorry, we're up to the third question for Kate and Jennifer.
Okay. For Kate and Jennifer, Kate, you're in your position with Minnesota. Jennifer, you're in your role with Golden State. You both ascended up your respective organizational charts. But what roadblocks did you encounter along the way of working in a historically male-dominated industry? Kate, we can start with you.
Welcome back, Kai, by the way. To have you. I think for me, it was, when I started in this industry, I was 23 23 years old, 22 years. Now I'm actually giving my age out, Rose, unlike you. I was like 22 years old, 23 years old. And so it was a very interesting perspective for me, having come in and working within, specifically on the baseball operations side of it, because I did have such interaction with players. That I was their age for some of them, you know, right? Like we have younger players from international that we sign internationally, but a lot of these players were my age. So in order to, some of the obstacles I faced really early on in my career was just trying to make sure that players understood exactly my role in terms of a front office position, and that I was, you know, it was hard for them to see me, not that I wanted to have them see me as a boss by any means, but just from a professional perspective, you know, they're my age. And so they saw me way more as a peer. And when I'm asking them to do things, sometimes it wasn't maybe received in the best way. Now that had nothing to do with, I think, my gender, but some of the gender obstacles I've faced a little bit is because historically Major League Baseball has been, you know, run by males, especially at the leadership level. I definitely faced some obstacles with just being seen more as somebody that could do more than just the secretarial, or what you would have considered secretarial work. And so I think, you know, I work for a really progressive organization. And so I don't know if I've run into as many obstacles as maybe other women have in their with their teams, but I do know that it was sometimes tough to kind of break through that barrier and prove to the gentleman kind of either next to me or above me that I'm just as capable of doing what they're doing, just because they just hadn't seen that. There wasn't much representation, especially when I first got into the game. I think, you know, it's funny we're talking about Kim Eng a lot because she's the first female general manager, and back when I started 15 years ago, she still was like one of the only people. We're still talking about her, and she's the only, you know, and so it took 16 years for her to break that ceiling. And so I think we're now starting to see the momentum kind of move in the right direction, but there were definitely obstacles that we all face as females in this industry, just being seen to real, you know, by others that we could do exactly what they're doing. And it had nothing to do with gender. So there you go. Jennifer, you got to follow me up.
Well, you know, you're a hard act to follow, but I would agree.
Not true.
I think what I find is, and it definitely has to do, well, I can only speak from my perspective, which is as a woman and a woman of color, is that I was routinely underestimated. You know, and so you're constantly proving yourself every single time. And I think, you know, having not only being routinely underestimated, but having a bar set higher for yourself versus maybe some of your peers or other people doing, you know, similar roles. Again, because I think, you know, because of being a woman and a woman of color. And so, you know, for me, it was always about being over prepared and really working to be sure that, you know, in any meeting I would, you know, not, you know, I've always had a voice, but it was to use that voice, right? I mean, women are always told to find your voice. We all know where our voice is. It's about using it. And so I think just being routinely underestimated was something that I always encountered. And I think it's, you know, and it's still prevalent today. I think back to just even, you know, I'd been a CFO prior to the Golden State Warriors. I was a CFO in entertainment. I had roles in television and in the theme parks world as a CFO. And when I was interviewing for the Golden State Warriors role, they were interviewing for a CFO. And they found me. I mean, they came to me. I didn't, you know, find them. By the time it got to, and then the interview process took months, you know, with presidents and owners and all these people. I mean, I met everybody. By the time it came to getting an offer, I remember that call because they said, well, you know, we love you. We're thinking that maybe you could start as, you know, VP of finance and then grow into the job. And I remember thinking, what are you even talking about? Like, I'm a CFO. And I will never know why they coached it that way. Only I can know that I think it's because I didn't look like their typical CFO. And I remember, you know, that moment because I said no. I said, no, there's no. Like you were looking for a CFO. I am a CFO. I'm not taking some other title until you get comfortable with me being able to do that job. But that's, you know, that's something that, you know, obviously they came back a few weeks later, apologized and gave me the role. And, you know, 7, 8 seasons later, clearly, you know, I was fine in having that role. I was qualified. But it's an example of where, you know, sort of that bias comes in unconscious. You know, I mean, obviously the organization I love, and I don't know why it started off that way, but I don't, you know, I would say I don't know that a guy would have been asked to take a different title first and grow into it or prove that they could do it. And so that constantly being underestimated is something that I think, you know, is part of the you know, the obstacles that you face, and you just have to be, you know, I think really strong, really committed, persevere, you know, thick skin, but most importantly, know your value, and be willing to fight for what you're really worth. And I think that goes across all industry, not just sports.
Absolutely. I think it's an incredible story from you, Jennifer. Kate, thank you so much for sharing. For Lauren and Rose, you both currently work for, you know, arguably the most recognizable brands in your industry. Rose, you're with the Yankees. Lauren, you're with Google. Is there anything in particular, any moment that you can pinpoint as being crucial in reaching where you are today? And Rose, we can start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Kai. I think, and Brianna hit on this, but I think it's consistency. It's been consistency in one of the cliches that I constantly get challenged on, which is hard work. Every person that I've ever interviewed tells me they're a hard worker, but I think it's constantly redefining what that means for you and what you're trying to achieve. And so I don't think it was one moment, though I can point to several moments that I can reflect on and say, wow, that was a turning point. But I think it's been being consistent, working harder than the person sitting next to me. I remember my mentor at Binghamton said, you're going to learn more before 9 and after 5 than you'll ever learn between those hours, because your boss has something else to do and someone else to focus on and their own job to focus on. And so I won't point to a moment. I'll point to that as kind of the overarching theme of what has driven my success. But there have been, and one message I do want to share with both parents and young women in this group, and I shared this with the panelists previously, there is a moment. I was on a run thinking about this call earlier in the week, and I was thinking about the moment when I was in 7th and 8th grade, and those are really big defining moments in a young woman or young boy's life. And I remember I was playing baseball and I was wrestling. And I remember the messaging that came to me at that time, which was I was 7-2 on the wrestling team, and I was still competing with the boys playing baseball. And the messaging from my school was, she's going to have to play softball when softball is offered, and messaging saying I shouldn't be wrestling when I go through whatever I'm going to go through. So my message to the parents is, we're going to have to compete with boys and men in the industry. So encourage them to do so, as long as they're competing and still winning and doing all the things that we're going to have to do in life. And to the young girls, don't stop. There's so much that you can achieve beyond, and I started a scholarship for my high school because I believe in this so much, beyond what your brain can even imagine.
Lauren, you get to follow that.
I know. Oh, thanks, Kai. Let's try here. So for me, it's been, I'll say this less eloquently than Rose, saying yes and doing the next fun thing. And so I have never had a linear path. I've never had goals where I've said, I need to do X, Y, and Z in order to get here in such and such time. I've just said yes. And sometimes, especially earlier on in my career, I wasn't sure how everything would map into something. But the advice that I often give is continue to build your arsenal of assets. You'll never know when you're going to need to pull it or when you're going to need to use it. And I think a fun example of that for me was when I was at Major League Baseball, as mentioned, I started the entertainment department. We decided to produce concerts in order to reach fans through music. So we started, our first concert was with this guy named Kevin Hammond, who I'm sure you all have never heard of. I think our concert was his first and last, but he was wonderful that night. And we grew it into a phenomenal concert series. We sold it to Pepsi. We would have, 50 Cent on stage with a Mets jersey on, and everyone would come in and get Mets tickets to the next game. So we're really trying to integrate things. to try to drive relevancy, ticket sales, and the fun part of baseball through music. Fast forward, now I'm at Google. Google owns YouTube. I was trying to get onto the YouTube side of the business, and we had just launched original content for YouTube. And Katy Perry wanted to drop her new album and live stream for 96 hours. Tape everywhere. She was on during her showers and everything else that she was doing for 96 hours. But it all culminated with a concert. And so when I was leaving Major League Baseball, I had no idea how learning how to scrappily produce concerts from the ground up would ever play into the next stage of my career. But when they were looking for somebody to work on this Katy Perry live stream, no one on the team knew how to produce concerts, and I did. And so I was able to pull that from my little arsenal of assets and, threw my hat in the ring. And it was one of the first YouTube original series that I worked on. And then shortly thereafter, I ended up earning my spot on the YouTube team. And so I've taken a couple different roles while at Google, a couple different roles while at YouTube. So I guess the biggest advice is to say yes. You know, my boss sometimes tells me, LV, you have to start saying no, but I don't want to. It's fun. If something's fun and if it's new, if it's exciting, it doesn't have to match into anything. Just do it and have fun and enjoy it. And you'll never know how those experiences will ultimately play into another part of your life.
Well, I don't think I could have thought of two better answers to that question. So thank you, Lauren and Rose. And this last question is for all four of you. As we've talked about Kim Eng, we're seeing more women taking on senior and high-ranking positions in sports. What message would you have for any young woman pursuing a career in sports? And if Jennifer, you would like to start first, you can do that.
Sure. Having gotten my first sports job later in my career, I would say don't focus solely on sports as an industry. That the reason I got into sports or I was primed and ready for the opportunity at the Warriors was because of the experiences I had prior to that. And I think sort of echoes what Lauren was talking about. Take the opportunities as they come. I was in industries tangential to sports, so theme park industry. I wasn't sure I wanted that job, but you know what? It made me better when the sports opportunity came, because what did we do? We sold tickets, we sold retail, we sold merchandise. So all the sorts of things that you do in a sports arena, we were doing in a different arena, right? And so I gained those skills. And so I think broadening your focus a little bit and really focus more on building, skill sets that are transferable across industries, so that when that opportunity does become available, you're more qualified than the next person because you have this arsenal of experiences because you didn't limit yourself.
That's great. Kate?
I would probably just say, there's absolutely no reason for you to even question whether you should work in sports. I just think that it's just natural to, I think there's a misconception that there's just certain roles, and sports organizations are pretty, there's not open opportunities, and there's a lot of different fields. I think one thing that I've found through my career and trying to have, informational interviews with people and speaking to high school and college groups is they don't realize how many departments we have within our organization. It's not just, the baseball operations or the basketball operations, or, it's not just ticket sales. There are so many other departments within professional sports, whether it's HR or like Jennifer with accounting and CFO, and there's, marketing, and there's all these different types of departments throughout sports. So I would just say, listen, there might not be representation the way that I would personally like to see it at the executive level and kind of above that, but there are women throughout professional sports, and you should never even question getting into it, because you absolutely can. It's attainable and it's out there for you, and I think there are plenty of opportunities, and so I just encourage everyone to not even question it. Just go for it.
Absolutely. Lauren, Rose, who wants to duke it out for that spot number 3?
Go ahead, Lauren.
Thank you, Rosie. So I'd actually like to add on to one of the things that I said earlier. When I realized that now working for Major League Baseball, I could no longer be a fan. a little bit of a lie, because what I will say is there were a few times, many times during my 6 years at MLB, I definitely got to geek out like a fan. And, the first time, one of the first memories was being on field at Yankee Stadium. Rose, was the new Yankee Stadium when the Yankees won the World Series. And I was, of course, working. But, I mean, my boss and I, who was also a Yankees fan, were looking at each other. We're like, oh, my gosh, like, this is really cool. All the players were jumping all over each other. We were getting wet with champagne. And it was amazing. So what I will say is, you like sports? You want to work in sports? Go for it. Because life shouldn't just happen after 6 p.m. You've got to figure out how to have fun and enjoy what you're doing during the time of 9 to 6 p.m. Or right now, it's kind of like a 24/7 thing that we all do because we're always connected. But I'd say if that's where your passion is and that's where you want to go for it. Because while it is work, and while there's a lot of the businessy stuff that goes into it, you still get to work in sports. And how cool is that? Being a woman should never stop you from doing anything. And if anybody tells you otherwise, you can find all of us on this panel right now and we'll have a word with them.
Absolutely. And Rose, last but not least.
Yeah, thanks, Kai. And I would piggyback a little bit on what Kate said. I think, and I'll make a little bit of a shameless plug, I don't think it's about getting into sports. If you want to get into sports, I'm going to make you work to connect with us because I want to know that I'm hiring someone gritty, but I love hiring athletes. I started my career in sales, so it was always looking at where you stood amongst your peers, where you were on the board, walking in every morning knowing that your effort was being measured, that your results were being measured, which really aligns with what we did in college as athletes. And so I don't think it's a question of getting access. I would challenge each one of you that was interested to look us up on LinkedIn and force your way in and find some, or if it's not in sports, find someone who inspires you and try to make your way into their office. I don't think it's a question necessarily of access. I think it's how far do you want to push it? And what are you willing to sacrifice to get there? Because I will say the journey wasn't always easy. I think, Lauren and I lived together right after college, and the number of things you can miss as a result of trying to move the needle in your career because, there's a weekend where you might be doing something that's called for, whatever that might be. So I don't think it's a question of access. I think it's a question of how far are you willing to take it.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Unfortunately, that ends our conversation for tonight. I wish we had time for our panelists to answer the live Q&A in the chat from all of you guys. Due to the technical difficulties, we won't be able to do that, but I've had a great time with all four of you on here tonight, especially my co-host, Lauren. Thank you so much for jumping in and everybody for bearing with us. But on behalf of Binghamton Athletics, myself, the university, thank you so much for being here. And not just that, but being great representations of the school and great pioneers in your field. So we can't thank you enough for being here and getting the chance to speak with you all. And now I'll send it back to Kate for our closing remarks.